Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hello online, folks. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a sort of light brown, beigey kind of woolly jumper today. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Okay, we got a few. This is for you. Welcome. This bit is, for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We are a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol, funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space, most of all, for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So a few quick notes before we start. Please do feel free to move around, fairly relaxed around here. The kitchen is back there. You're welcome to grab a cup of tea or coffee or some water or whatever. We do have a quiet space through just to my left, to your right, through this wall here. If you need to take a break at any point, you can pop in there. It's pretty well soundproofed. There are fire exits. If you hear a fire alarm, we don't have a fire drill planned, so that's probably real. So if you hear the fire alarm, the studio team will direct you towards the fire exits, but in any event, they are at the other end of the studio at either side, again, to my left, to your right. And there are accessible toilets, including baby change, in the corridor over there, just next to the kitchen. All right, there'll be a Q&A at the end of the talk. Those of you who are watching online, you can pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lautem here will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone so that the folks at home can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by going to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. Right, that's enough of that. Our speaker for today is Camilla Morelli. Camilla is a senior lecturer in social anthropology at the University of Bristol. For over 15 years, she has conducted ethnographic research with forest-dwelling children and young people, exploring how their imagination and desires for the future drive large-scale processes of socioeconomic change and shape the future of their societies and natural environments. Today, she's going to talk about her work on ethnographic animation, films that blend people's lived experiences with fictional storytelling and imaginative scenarios. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Camilla.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me and for coming to this talk. So I'm a senior lecturer in social anthropology, and I am a Mediterranean woman with a strong Italian accent. So if anything I say doesn't, if I'm going too fast, please ask me to slow down, and I will repeat myself. So I'm a senior lecturer in social anthropology, and I have conducted most of my research, on which I will give a very short introduction and background. Now, I have conducted most of my research in the Amazon rainforest for the past 15 years, and I work with children and young people, so I specialize in the anthropology of childhood and youth. And most of my work has taken place in Amazonian Peru with an indigenous population, the Matses, who, just to give a bit of background on the Matses until 40 years ago had no contacts, or at least no peaceful contacts with any other people. And their villages are set quite remotely deep in the Amazon rainforest. Again, just for context, to get to the village where I do most of my research, I fly to Peru, and then I take another flight to Iquitos, a big city built in the middle of the Amazon. Then I take another small plane that takes me even deeper into the Amazon, and then I travel on a canoe for 12 hours, and then I reach the village, which is, it's not easy, but it's easier when the University of Bristol kindly supports your travel. But when you're a Matses person who lives, remotely in the rainforest, doing the trip the other way around is almost impossible, or at least very, very difficult. Which means that most people in the village rarely travel outside. And when I first went to work with the Matses about, again, 15 years ago, my interest was to examine how children grow up in a forest environment and how they developed cognitive understandings, but also practical forms of engagement with the rainforest environment. So when I got there, I started asking a lot of questions to the children about the forest, how they like the forest, what they think of animals, of plants. And the kids were giving me pretty much the same answer. I don't care about the forest. So their parents and grandparents spend all of their day trekking, hunting, foraging wild fruits. The kids were not very interested. And the more I asked about the forest, the more they asked me about the city. They were saying, you come from this amazing world of concrete and artificial light and television. Why would you want to talk about the rainforest? And so this that you see here, so these processes that I talk about are the subject of my book, Children of the Rainforest. And this drawing that you see here was a drawing made by a 10-year-old girl. I mean, she was 10 at the time, Paloma, who made this big drawing of Iquitos, the city. And you see these huge houses where you can see how much she was pushing with this black pen, because the houses, she said, are all made of concrete. And then there are streets that are also made of concrete. And then these are cars, and in the city, and in the center of the city, there's a car where Paloma drew herself and her mother traveling around the city. And Paloma said to me, asked me, is there concrete in your homeland? And I said, yes, Paloma, there's a lot of concrete in my homeland. Why do you like concrete? And she said to me in her language, cemento bunchiebi, which means I love concrete, or more literally as a translation, it means I am hungry for concrete. I crave concrete. So my research, my work, which was intended to be a work about how children developed a cognitive development process in a rainforest environment, very much became about how children develop imaginations of far away elsewhere, and how their imagination is driving radical processes of social, economic, and environmental change that are affecting the future of Amazonia, of Latin America, and therefore having a key impact on the rest of the world. The Amazon hosts a quarter of the world's biodiversity, half of the world's rainforests, and these children, through imaginative, playful process, really are shaping certain futures for this crucial region of the world. And so I started analyzing how this is happening. And because the thing is that Paloma here is drawing herself in the city with her mother, but she had never actually been to the city ever. So this desire for this amazing world of concrete was all happening at the level of imagination. She could not get to the city. As I said, it's very complicated, but the children talk about the city all the time. Talk about the world, the outside world, all the time. That's what they want to play about. That's what they want to talk about. And throughout the years, what I have seen, because I return to the same place every year, what I have seen is that these children grew up. And as soon as they were able to, they left the forest and they are moving to the city. And when they get to the city, the reality of the world of concrete hits them because it's very different from how they had constructed it in their imagination. And so I started, when I started this research, I was only a PhD student. I was, it was very early days in my research process. And as I started working with the same children in the city, I saw the level of hardship that they face in the urban world. First of all, they realized that they are poor. And some of them told me, I cannot sleep at night sometimes because I have no money to buy food. So I just lie in bed hungry. They were all living in the slums of Iquitos. They don't speak Spanish fluently. That was another big issue. They were dealing with a radically different system of cultural values. Now, I will not go into this, but these young migrants moved from what in anthropology we call a sharing economy, where you have a right to ask people for stuff. So if I have 2 laptops, Lawotim has a right to say, you've got 2 laptops, give me one. And I have to give him a laptop, otherwise I'm a terrible person. And they move from that system to a city where everybody has got so much more stuff than them. But if you ask people for stuff, you're the bad guy. You don't do that. And this is really difficult to adjust to. So there's all these different challenges. But one issue that they really kept bringing up to me as we talked is that in this, with all these challenges that they're facing, what they really also struggled with was a feeling of being invisible. They felt that in the city, people don't even know who they are, and that all these stories that they want to tell, all these things that are happening to them, including the stories of their indigenous heritage, their cultural backgrounds, nobody's asking about them. Nobody's listening, and they feel unheard, and they feel voiceless. And as my research process evolved, and as the kids obviously started becoming older, what I became interested in doing is a different type of research, a type of research that is collaborative from the start. And so I started working with these grown-up children, these young adults, and we started developing together from the very outset new research projects where they will participate in the research process, production, and output production from the outset in a way that can obviously benefit them directly. And so we started developing a project called Animating the Future, which I deliver in partnership with my key collaborator, who is a Bristol-based animation director, Sophie Marsh. So Bristol is obviously known internationally for our amazing animation industry. And I was lucky enough to start working with Sophie. And together we started developing these projects in collaboration with Amazonian artists as well. And we started using animation and teaching young people how to produce animated films from start to finish, so that they have a way to tell their own stories and share them with others. And I will tell you later what they have started doing with this. But as I was saying, so this is a very collaborative project that we deliver with large groups of people. And the idea is that we bring together anthropology and animation. So this methodology that we use, we are calling it ethnographic animation, in that we produce films that are based on, let's say, lived experiences, real life stories. But then that blend this with imaginative scenarios. For example, with the futures that these young people would like to have for themselves, for their environments, for their communities. And again, the films are written by young people. So our animators, we work with animators, so it's me and Sophie, but then we work with local animators. And what the animators do is that we deliver practice-based workshops where we always start our research with ethnographic discussions. Now, I don't know how many people here will be familiar with the concept of ethnography, but ethnography is essentially the practice of anthropological theory, let's say. So it's what we do in our discipline. And we start with an ethnographic discussion where we encourage children and young people to tell us about their own stories. And this is something, the value of this is something that the animators themselves have highlighted, because the animators said we often teach people how to make animations, but the crucial aspect that makes this different is that young people who, as they told us so often, feel voiceless, feel like nobody ever asked, in this context have an opportunity to really voice their concerns. And on the kind of research, academic research side of things, obviously I work with local Amazonian anthropologists as well, and we use this to identify the key challenges faced by indigenous children and youth in Amazonia, which really remain under-examined. So children and young people form the largest demographics of most rural forest-dwelling societies across the world. In Amazonia, 60% of indigenous people are under 15 years of age. So their voices really should be central to research, to policy action, to development strategies, and instead they always remain marginal to it. When there's a development program aimed at children and young people, it's always kind of made for them rather than with them. And we want to do a different kind of research. We want to do research that will shed new light on the challenges that these young people face, but again, research that will be done with them, that will benefit them from the very start. And indeed, these animations are part of it. So our animations are co-produced, co-created. Young people choose which stories they want to tell, and then they learn how to make stop-motion animations mainly, from start to finish, using technologies that are available to them. So something I've seen in the past 15 years of working in rural Latin America, let's say, is that communities that were, let's say poor, so communities that were living in poverty are still living in poverty. The situation, if anything, got worse. They didn't have running water 15 years ago. They don't have running water now. They didn't have electricity 15 years ago. No electricity now. However, absolutely everyone owns a smartphone. Smartphones have become objects of primary necessity, and everybody has one. And so what we do is that we use these available technologies. We teach young people how to make animations using their smartphones so that they don't need to rely on us being there to do this. Again, we work together on stories that they decide to write. But then our animators really encourage them to use their imagination. And we see how, so as I was saying, in my research, I have developed a theory of the imagination, of children's imagination, as a catalyst for social, economic, and environmental change. The current work that I am doing wants to build on this theory of the imagination as a catalyst for social change and use that power that the imagination has to achieve tangible impact on the current lives of these children and young people, but also on the sustainable futures that they're aiming to achieve. So I'll give you as an example the two stories of two films that they made. So these are two workshops that we deliver in Iquitos. Actually, it's the same workshop, but different groups of young people. And we work with a group of young women. After having done a big part of ethnographic research, so we had interviewed young women, we had asked them what are the challenges you face and what are the futures that you desire. And a lot of young women, and I'm talking about women in their early 20s, when we asked them, what do you want for your future? They said to us, which future? And we say, well, in the future, in the years to come, what do you want? And they were saying, well, I've got kids, I have no money, what can I want? And one of them said to us, I don't have a future. And she's 24. And this is a big issue that needs to be addressed seriously, that needs to be highlighted to any decision maker who has the power to change that. And it needs to be highlighted from these young women's perspectives. So one group that took part in the workshop was a group of young women from different groups in Amazonia. And the animator, a Peruvian animator, Rose, our collaborator, worked with them, and she was, let's say, guiding them on writing a story on young women's futures. And she said, at the beginning, so as we saw at the beginning, there was nothing. Nobody was coming up with any story. And again, there was this idea of, I'm a woman, now all I have to do is look after my children. I have no future. I cannot ask anything for myself. And the animator, Rose, was very passionate, really started saying to them, look, guys, with animation, you can do anything you want. Dream big, because we'll draw it and we'll make it happen. And we went from, I have no future, to these girls writing a story about the first indigenous Amazonian woman who graduates in university with an indigenous scholarship and then becomes the first indigenous woman president of Peru. And then, but what I find amazing about this film is that indigenous people in many different places are now, at the moment, in the current time of expansion, global expansion of neoliberal markets that all follow the same model of economic progress, they're really being forced to think, to accept the fact that if they want to be part of economic progress, if they want to be rich, if they want to take part, to benefit from market economies, they need to give up their traditional values, their heritage, and follow the, capitalistic, neoliberal economic model of development that all the rest of the world is taking. In this film, and in many other conversations that we had, actually young indigenous people are coming up with their own models of economic development that contrast these, other models that they often are imposed upon. And what they said is that this woman president goes back to the community. And she sets up a program of scholarships that she shares with other girls, other women, so that they can also benefit from that. So again, what I really loved about this is that it's these young people themselves that are coming up with solutions, where this idea of sharing that is really foundational to Amazonian economies becomes part and becomes a foundational part of an alternative model of economic progress. That doesn't mean that they have to give up their cultural, traditional values and still benefit from market economies. And what we are doing now, of course, is that we are taking this to policymakers, to governmental authorities, to people that have the power to make a change. And we're saying, this is what we need. We need this level of scholarships. This is the demands of these young women. And what we're doing is that it's the young women themselves. So we are simply building a bridge between them so that they can voice their own needs. And this is another film called Vision for the Future. And this is a young man who graduates from university, but as you can see him, he's graduating and he's wearing this typical, Western graduation outfit, but he's holding a bow and arrow. Because what he was saying is, yes, I'm taking this pathway that is taking me far away from my community, but I have that within me. My heritage is part of me. And this is part of another problem. I won't go into it too much now, but some of these young people manage to build a successful life for themselves, or at least, they work very, very hard. And something that's happening to them now that they learn Spanish, they got a job, they graduated in university. Now what's happening is that people tell them, oh, you know what? You don't look indigenous. And they're like, well, what do you want me to do? Put some feathers on my head and walk around the city naked? It's almost as if they're constantly reminded that there is no place for them. And this is a serious issue. Because this idea of not being fully integrated in the city, but no longer being part of their community, is having a terrible impact on young people's mental health. And there's a worryingly rising number of youth suicides all across Amazonia and in other parts of the world that, again, remains under-examined. Feels like nobody's really doing too much about it, but it's a big issue. So this is another project that we did with young Shipibo people. So the Shipibo are an indigenous group of who live in Amazonia and Peru. And visual, but in general, any kind of art is a really key part of Shipibo culture. And we work with a number of Shipibo young people who were really keen to take part in this project and to learn how to produce animations on their art. And what we did is that we also work with a young rapper who produced a rap on Shipibo heritage. And I am going to actually show you the film called Nona Shebo, which means, Nona Shebo kind of means our culture. And again, this film was produced as part of this work that the young Shipibo themselves wanted to do about the importance of this feeling of anxiety about this heritage loss, let's say. A lot of young people don't know how to speak their native languages anymore. They feel that they're not as good as their parents and grandparents when it comes to traditional skills and knowledge. And this is really, it's leading to anxiety. This year, for the first time in 15 years, I started hearing the word stress, by which young people meant in general mental health issues. I had never heard this before. And now everybody's becoming anxious, becoming stressed. They need to work, they need to find a job, they need to make money, but then at the same time they're losing their language, they're losing their skills. So it's a lot that these young people it's a lot of pressure on them. But the key thing about this project we are doing is that we really encourage young people to start visualizing futures of hope again. The word animation comes from the Latin animare, which means bring to life. And so we take this animation making as a first step to visualize these sustainable, hopeful futures, and then to bring them to life, to make them a reality. So let's see the film.
Shinambu biri untana dra haki dribi bua dribe Shinamaku ayuntana dra haki dribi ga bua dribe Nunga shebu buchi kya kimbuka si baku rano riki ga Drama dra pikuku maskuka sa hawu kibu nash Drama matu shinamai matu asha kasi Chinibu baku bu dribi haku aki asha kasi Ija itei shinambu dribi drama pikuku Niska drei nukun biribi nukun fika biribi Gara bua shamani Niska shamani, macha ki shamani Ea bua I neskadrai hawaki pikuti Sinambu buchikianu bukamu Titang itang no kumpapa Bonraga ani usebu Nitin shunai ki ha usebuija Ea ka I no kumpai Askadra hawaki bujibija mwapikuku Neskadrai bua shamani Tianja nukuruku Neskadrai hawaki bujibi Shinabi untana ja haki jibi makutai Buadrai no kumfuente também haciendo las cosas que me salen. Yo, shina jibi jaman bi untana haki jibi. Shina bubi untana jaga bua jibi haki jibi. Neskadrai no kun shina jibi. Matu yui kasi. Titai tambak janu bu jibi. Matu hau kibu yui kasi. Matu hau kibu akin kasi. Yeah.
I'm sorry that there were no subtitles in. We made a last-minute change and there were no subtitles on this version. But what the song says is that it's all about being proud of being Shipibo. And again, it's a kind of way of reclaiming these identities that these young people have been told for so long. Well, one issue that they really brought up is that in the city, on top of it all, they also feel really discriminated against. I mean, I think you probably all remember the words of former Peruvian President Alan Garcia, who said that indigenous people are Class B citizens because they're an obstacle to the kind of progress that certain states want to achieve, the kind of North American level of progress. We need to be in business with the United States. We cannot be talking about sharing our resources with. So, yeah, this is what they've been facing a lot. Another issue that Shipibo youth have been facing is that, and indigenous youth in general across Amazonia, is that when they get to the city, they get called ugly. They're told that they're ugly by local people. And what Shipibo youth have started doing, I told you that the art is a big part of Shipibo culture, is that they started, a lot of women, and some of the women we work with are models. So what they started doing is that they set up their own beauty pageants. And some of these women, again, are fashion models. We work with a fashion designer who was designing these outfits that were the end of the world. They were incredible. And as you know, they often get stolen by big, high-profile fashion designers internationally. And instead, they were saying, actually, we want to design our own lines of clothing. We want to do our own fashion modeling. And in one of the films they made, they talk about fashion as a way, again, to affirming this pride of Shipibo identity. And the models imagine themselves in a fashion show in Paris, exhibiting these designs that are quintessentially Shipibo and gaining recognition for it. So I'm going to show you this film. Again, what I find interesting is that these young people, they have the solutions. It's not that they're lost. They know what they want. They want scholarships. They want enhanced access to education for local women. They want to address the issue of discrimination. They want their fashion designs to be seen. The matter is finding a way to get there. And this is what we are working together to achieve. I'm just going to briefly tell you about some of the outcomes of this work. So, again, when I started working in the Amazon, as I told you, there's this very big intergenerational divide there, in the sense that the kids, all they wanted to talk about was television, the city, Jean-Claude Van Damme, that's what they like. And the older people only want to talk about the forest, their traditional knowledge, animals, forest spirits, and so forth. And the kids they loved everything that I did and that I have, my laptop, my camera. They thought that it was just the coolest thing ever. The older people, not so much. They very often told me, you cannot do anything. You work on a laptop, that's just pointless. However, I have to say, throughout the years, they realize how much the kids love doing this work. They kind of, at some point you have to accept it. The kids like digital technologies and watching films. And 5 years ago, a group of elderly people came to us actually and said, can you please do a project? And you make your animations, that stuff that you always make, that the kids love so much, but you make them about our myths. Because they have all this mythology that none of the children is learning. And when the elders die, all these amazing myths are going to be entirely forgotten. This is an issue that the United Nations have flagged as a key priority for their 2030 agenda. This heritage is endangered. Something has to be done. And again, it's the elderly people that came to us and said, how about you make some of these films, instead of Jean-Claude Van Damme and helicopters flying over the Amazon, make them about the myths, so the kids will watch them. And that's what we did. So in the past 2 years, we've been making these animations about endangered myths that the kids have produced. So they learn about the myths, and now they have them on their smartphones. And these myths that were undocumented now are documented through animated films. But and we made one in, and we made some of these in Colombia as well. They invited us in Colombia to do the same kind of thing. But what I really want to stress is that it's not that we make the film. We teach young people how to make them so that this project can be sustainable, so that once we leave, this can keep going. This project with the Ticuna in Colombia, a group of young Ticuna people produced a film on their myth called The Origin of Light, the birth of light. And we produced this as part of a film festival that was being organized by a Colombian woman, Marta, who decided to go around Colombian, Amazonian communities, bringing a huge projector and doing a film festival there. Because she said a lot of people in these communities, they have never seen films before. They don't even know what a cinema is. I want these opportunities to, if they cannot travel to the city, I'll take this opportunity to them, and we'll do a film festival there. First, and in parallel, we were doing a workshop to teach young people how to make animations. So Marta goes to a community on the second day of our workshop, and it was her opening night. And we weren't there at the opening night, we were there afterwards. But so she started and she thought, okay, I need to introduce this project. I need to explain what a cinema is. And she thought, how am I going to do it? So she stood up and she said, okay, this is cinema. Does anybody know what cinema is? And a young Ticuna woman that had taken part in our workshop stood up and she gave a 5-minute talk on how she's a filmmaker and she knows how to make animation, and she explained people how you make an animated film. So this was, I was very, very happy that she could, she had her moment of glory, and that, this could then keep going, of course. These are workshops, animation workshops, that the young people we work with continue doing after our work. So after our work, the young people that we work with set up stop-motion clubs, and they keep making their animations to record endangered heritage. And some of the animations that they're sending us are just incredible. They're using techniques that our animators haven't taught them. They're just coming up with stuff. And one of these groups, the Shipibo, I told you before, they had never used animation before, and they got a grant from the Peruvian government to produce their first feature-length animation on Shipibo stories. So this was really fantastic. And what we are doing this summer we got an invitation from the director of an institute that trains indigenous school teachers. So what we are doing is that we are going to the institute and we are teaching, the animators are teaching these teacher trainers how to use animation as an educational tool. And we are working with the Ministry of Education to make sure that this new technique is embedded in the official curriculum for indigenous school children. So that my own hopeful view of the future is that in 5 years' time, there are going to be all these kids in the Amazon that are always complaining, rightly so, about digital exclusion, about not having the same standard of education. And all these kids in 5 years' time will be in their communities making animations on their endangered heritage and telling their own stories and owning them. And I will conclude now, absolutely, with 2 success stories. One, I put myself in it as well because I was just so proud of this moment. This is Roldan, who when I started doing my research was a child dreaming about the concrete world. In 2018, we did our first project together, and he was a research participant. So he was one of the kids learning how to make animation. At the same time, he started studying anthropology in the university. And he graduated, becoming the first anthropology graduate of his whole society of 4,000 people. And in 2022, we started a new project, our project Animating the Future, and he collaborated at the project as a research associate, which was a big thing because the project started in 2020, so I couldn't get to Peru, of course, and I thought that we had to give the money back, which I was desperate about, give up the research process. And instead I called him up and I said, Roldan, it's either you do the research, the actual data gathering process, or it doesn't happen. And he was just an undergraduate student at the time, and he did an incredible work. And as a research associate, funded by the British Academy, so it was a big kind of gig. And after that, he got a very big, prestigious scholarship to do a master's in Brazil, where he is now. And this year, he received his first grant as principal investigator to conduct a project on the use of animation to record indigenous heritage. So this is what makes me hopeful about the future amongst everything else that's happening. And this is Guillermo, who is the artist I collaborate with. And Guillermo is the only visual artist also in his community of also 4,000 people. And he started drawing as a child, but he had never been to a city. And so he would use berries and soil for color, and he would draw on leaves. And then he went to the city when he was 21. He sold a chicken. He had a chicken. He sold the chicken, and he bought 2 pencils and some pieces of paper. And he started drawing. And then somehow the Ministry of Education saw his drawings, and they started working with him. And 5 years ago, we met, and we said, hey, how about we make animations with your drawings? And we started working together, and Guillermo has worked at our international British Academy and other grant funding bodies funded projects. And his art following this has been exhibited internationally, and his animations have also been screened internationally. And so, again, I just want to conclude with these success stories amongst all, the enormous challenges that these young people are facing. I put this photograph there because this is, last year, Roldan and I gave a conference paper, and this was Roldan's first international conference talk, which when you're an academic is a huge deal. And I was so grateful to be sharing this moment with him. So I conclude here, leave you my contacts here, and I will leave it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Does anyone have a question?
I'm wondering about the children now, their futures. And that's a very personal thing, although, you know, you're concerned about the group as well. The future of the Amazon itself, preserving the stories, the traditions is one thing, and that is anthropology. How do they feel about the ecology? Has that impressed upon them as well? Because they weren't interested before. They took it as a matter of course because the parents did the foraging and so on. How do they feel about it now?
So I'll show you back this slide. This is a myth about, this is one of the you know, their cultural stories, a myth about, the myth is about the origin, how different societies formed. And the way they formed is that at the beginning, all people lived together, but they needed to cross the river. So to cross the river, they threw meat into the river, and they used this giant anaconda as a bridge. Then the giant anaconda sinks, and the people are split, and that's the origin of society. If you look at, from a Western perspective, the ecology, let's say, or at least what is the environment and what is the cultural, social side of things are separate. But for an Amazonian perspective, they're not. Nature and society, the very word of nature and society are very wrong in an Amazonian context because there's no strict separation between nature and society.
Even for those children who didn't show an interest initially?
Well, that would be a very interesting kind of anthropological study in itself, but not really. It's still like that for the young generations because that's the background that they come from.
Sure.
So thinking of a future of the environment and thinking of a future of the cultural, social heritage is really the same thing. And this is why I am so upset, so annoyed that when we have these big, COP conferences every year, why are these perspectives not included? All our conversations on climate change, environmental futures, they're all based on these Western understandings of nature and society, which I'm just going to say, it's the very same understanding that led us to destroy the planet. And now we use it to save it. And instead these voices should be included, which tell us that some kind of trees are sentient beings.
Yes.
But if you bring that to to COP.
And the other thing is, of course, we're part of nature. We're not separate. We have used resources to build certain things, but we are not separate.
I agree with you, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm not going to word this very well, so bear with me. I'm interested in your kind of original question about imagination and how that's building a future and what change that kind of precipitates. And then this shock where these children are moving to the cities and it's not what they imagined. And I'm curious, because it sounds like the response is really double down and have a terrible time in the city, which isn't like the imagining, rather than seek something else elsewhere or return to what's safe. And I'm wondering if that's true to what you've experienced and whether you know how that plays out.
So how what plays out? So if the children want to...
So there's this... I knew I'd do a terrible job.
No.
There's something about an imagination and a future.
Yeah.
And I think we're probably all thinking, well, it doesn't bode very well for the forest, right? But the imagination is not correct, almost. It's made up, and it doesn't match their experience once they get there.
Yes.
Does that shock have an impact? How does it show up?
Yeah. That's actually in the first film we made about this migration, they were using the word shock. It was hitting them because they were thinking, oh, I'll get there and I'll find a job. I hear that people have jobs there, so I'll find a job. And then it's not easy. The hunger was something that they talk about. I mean, I never fell asleep feeling hungry because I didn't have money to buy food. Being in a place where you don't know anyone. This might seem obvious, but it's not really something that they thought about before. And then all of a sudden, you don't know anyone. Missing people is not something that they had anticipated. All this kind of hits them all at once. And then And the problem is, when they started becoming successful, having some friends, learning the language, then they get told, well, they get told by their families at home that they should be sharing this with them, but they have nothing to share. And they're told by the people that they're not indigenous anymore. So it's all this, it's almost as if they're bombarded with all this stuff. And there's no way out. There's no way to say, actually, this is what's happening. So, yes, it's a shock, exactly like you said, yeah.
Thank you. This is really, really fascinating stuff. And I'm really glad, just touching back on the gentleman's question earlier, you touched on those sort of competing narratives about how we sort of shape and define reality and how we have to start to recognize and respect those that are different from us. So thinking about that in terms of narrative, did you as practitioners find points of difference or discrepancy when you were trying to bring some of these storytelling practices to the young people? And as a follow-up, did you have any kind of ethical concerns about the way that you were projecting, I suppose, westernized or global north models of narrative onto these young people's sense of their world?
That's a great question. So something that has, well, two things. The first thing is that I spent my whole first part of the research in the forest asking children about heritage and the past and the forest, and they were like, no, let's talk about, they were making drawings of Jean-Claude Van Damme flying a helicopter and fighting with Mazes people in a war. So when I started 5-6 years ago my work about the future, I started working with these children that have now grown up and say, let's talk about the future. And they were talking about the past. So I was like, oh my God, what? What are you? What? And I started seeing how that was really interesting because, of course, from an Amazonian perspective, the past is the future. There's no future if this heritage is gone. That's it. So their understanding of the past and the future are very different from my understanding of the past and the future and the present. And in terms of ways of thinking, the thing that always amazes me when we are doing this work is that there are some of us it's a very kind of diverse kind of group of people that we work with. And let me see if I can get, so some of us are European, some of these groups are indigenous Amazonians, some are Latin people. And what always amazes me is how in this diverse group, there are some real similarities depending on our professional background, since we are talking about practice. So me and Roldan, the anthropologist, we just understand each other. Someone says, oh, let's write a story about this. And me and Roldan go, oh, no, that anthropological is not, is not great. But at the same time, we are completely incapable, me and Roldan, of picturing things. We are not visual people. And the animators, they just need to say one word to each other and immediately they know what they're saying. And so it's a very good moment of, I don't know, it's a good space of empathy in the recognition of these radical differences that divide us completely, that will never be reconciled. But there are these moments in this practice of empathy that kind of bring us close together, again, in the acceptance that these radical differences are there.
First of all, congratulations. This is really, I think, powerful research. I have a question. I don't know if it's premature, but because I don't know how many years some of these people have been migrated to the city. But I'm wondering, in their effort to kind of maintain their identity, do they still in the city maintain the sense of community that they had? And also, is there evidence, because again, it might be quite premature, that there is some effort to create this alternative maybe economy that is more based in their kind of way of life before the city? instead of just adapting to the dominant Western lifestyle. I think.
Thank you for your question. So about the economy, actually Roldan and I are co-authoring an academic article now about economic transitions in Amazonia, and we're going full Marxist at it, but also challenging Marx, because he had his big limits, what we are bringing to light is that, again, these young people, they have the solutions, they know what they want, and so Peru is going quite deep down the, again, neoliberal, you have to be an entrepreneur to be successful. So they're giving incentives to people, to individuals who want to open their business. And, and it's very individualistic, and it's very, let's follow the American dream and all that stuff, which goes completely against the economic models of Amazonian societies that are all based on sharing, they're all based on community practices and so forth. And, if you look at it from the outside, you think, oh, wow, these young people are completely giving in to the model of economic progress there. But actually, it's not the case. And they have come up with solutions to make the economy sustainable for their communities too. So we are working with a young woman. She's an activist. She's super passionate. And she wants to set up a program for indigenous women in her community for them to sell crafts outside and then share the profits. This other guy, he's amazing. He is training as a psychotherapist, and he's asking the state to basically pay for this practice so that indigenous youth in his community can get sessions for mental health and well-being. So the solutions are all there. What we are doing now is that we are bringing them, we have worked with UNESCO, we have worked with the Ministry of Education. Someone needs to bring them to the attention of people that have the power to make this change. But also I think there's real power in really telling these young people, your idea is valid, is great, you can do it, keep going with it.
Thank you, and a quick follow-up. Is there an example perhaps of one person or of thoughts of somebody that has, migrated, went to the city and decided, actually, this is not for me, I want to go back? Or a thought, do you have any knowledge of that? Of somebody thinking maybe about it? Thank you.
So without getting too philosophical, but I think you never go back. Even if you go back, you never go back, if that makes sense. Because, this act of moving to the city is one way. Yeah, you can go back and live in the forest, but you'll never go back. It's kind of...
The anaconda has sunk.
The anaconda has sunk. Yeah, the anaconda has sunk, but what I think is that there's a way for the anaconda and Jean-Claude Van Damme to be part of the same drawing, metaphorically speaking.
Thanks. Hi. Going back to the myths of the culture, the cultural heritage type thing. Did you feel a pressure to try and record as many versions of that from the older people in the community for the young people to animate, just before it's all lost?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I told my animators, okay, I want to make 10 myths, and they said, you're dreaming. Yeah, we had. And in the village, there's no electricity, no connection, no power. So we had to use this generator. We had to use these solar panels. And yes, it was a lot of pressure. But this is why we are building this system now where then people can go and document and record themselves. Also because it's not really, I want to share this with young people because I started doing this work. I obviously feel extremely close to the people I work with. And I think that there's an element of, responsibility also, you have resources, let's share them when we can. But do it in a way that is sustainable. And last year we managed to produce 3 myths in the Matses village where we were, and particularly the anaconda one. It was amazing because at the beginning, I did an interview because I had to measure impact for university systems. And I started asking, who knows this myth? What can you tell me? Silence. Then we recorded the myths. And at the end, I was staying with my friend, who's a woman with her family, and she was cooking, and she was joking, and to joke, she was kind of pretending to be a woman in the myth. So the myth had become part of everyday conversation. So I thought, oh, great, let me write this for my impact case study. Yeah.
All right, I think that's probably all we got time for, but Camilla, you're hanging around for a little bit?
Yes, sir, if you want to ask.
Great. Well, first of all, let's say thank you to Camilla.
Thank you.
All right. Before you all go, if you do want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, come find one of the studio team. Studio team, give us a wave. We're here. We'll be happy to help. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you all again next week.